This just in. Luke Walton has been fired by the Sacramento Kings. Just kidding, but not really.
I wish he had.
Check it out.
What's up, Kings fans? Welcome to another episode of the Royal Report with Calvin and Barry. Oh man, it's been a rough week to be a Kings fan. The Sacramento Kings dropped to 5-10 after a 4-game slide. Quick shout out to all my Kings fans out there. I know it's rough, but let's just keep it together. Let's stick together. There will be brighter days ahead, I promise. And if you're new to this channel, make sure you hit that big red subscribe button down below.
That's right, Barry. We're Kings fans. I mean, it's going to take more than a 4-game slide to make us go away, right? On today's show, De'Aaron Fox explodes for a career-high 43 points. Barry and I will tell you if we're entertaining any trade offers from various GMs around the league. And we'll look at some Kings adjustments that need to be made going forward. But we begin with some highlights around the league.
Talk to me for a second, Commissioner. When you talk about players, coaches, league personnel, getting vaccinated for COVID-19. Can you talk to me about that? How are you guys going to go about doing that?
Sure, although we're somewhat in the dark, not unlike most people. Yeah. Certainly, there's no way we would ever jump the line in any form whatsoever.
Adam Silver has come out this week and said that they are considering vaccinating NBA players as a public service announcement. Cal, how do you feel about this?
I feel this is maybe the one and only misstep in Adam Silver's entire run as commissioner of the NBA. He's handled everything else pretty much flawlessly up until this point, but this just feels awkward. It feels weird. It feels like it should not be coming from him. I have a direct quote from him here. There would be a real public health benefit to getting some very high-profile African Americans vaccinated. While I think there's a lot of truth to that statement, I don't think that he's in a position to be making that statement right now. I think as far as the NBA goes, the players are very outspoken in general. They have a long track record of standing up for what they believe is right. And I think that this statement coming from guys like LeBron or Jaylen Brown or some of these other guys that have been outspoken in the past, it would have meant a lot more. And this just feels awkward and weird to me.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's a good sentiment, but a public service announcement is going to be vaccinating a handful of players, not the whole league or the majority of the league. And I think that the league is in trouble right now. We're starting to see these games rack up. They're being postponed. There's players missing games. Sometimes there's 7 players or 8 players available for a game. So I think it comes down to money. The league doesn't want to miss out on any more money. And, honestly, the players don't want to miss out on more money too. So I think they're trying to create new protocols and look at other options to stop the spread and stop these game postponements. But at this point, I think that it's kind of feels like they're trying to jump ahead in line. And I'm not really cool with it.
Yeah, I don't think it's a good look for the league. I don't think it's a good look for Adam Silver. And these COVID postponements have now officially started to affect the Sacramento Kings. Their first games, they have a 2-game set scheduled with the Memphis Grizzlies next week that are now postponed because of the fact that the Memphis Grizzlies don't have the 8 minimum available players to play those games. So an opportunity for the Kings to take a little bit of rest, get back to the drawing board and start to refocus while they get ready to make their run at next week's schedule.
Yeah, the Memphis Grizzlies are just getting started on their outbreak. I think 3 games have been postponed so far. The Wizards were dealing with an outbreak last week. They just got back to practice. This is not the first time we've seen this, and it's not going to be the last. So let's all get ready, get prepared. It's going to be a weird season. Speaking of weird, guess who's back? Kyrie Irving is back from a 7-game absence. Joined his brothers with the Brooklyn Nets a brand new teammate in James Harden, and he's looking every bit of the part. How do you feel about seeing Kyrie back on the court, Cal?
Well, it's good to talk about stuff that's actually happening on the court first and foremost, but it was great to see Kyrie. He is the same player that he's always been. I found it not surprising that he took the most shots on the team the other night in that game against Cleveland. It was, in fact, Kyrie Irving tribute night in Cleveland, and he was outdueled actually by a guy wearing the same number that he used to play with in Cleveland, and he was wearing Kyrie's signature shoes too. That was a little interesting to me as well. But 37 points for Kyrie. He looked like he didn't miss a beat. The question really is going to be, how are these guys all going to gel together? And on that note, it was the debut officially of the Big Three in Brooklyn. Barry, what did you think of how they looked?
Well, it was cool to see a couple games with just KD and James Harden running their little two-man game. That was really exciting. Seeing Kyrie Irving come back, you see all the potential from this team. But to be completely honest with you, I was a little disappointed in that team. When you look at the box score, and James Harden has a triple-double with 21, 12, and 10. Kyrie Irving scores 37, and Durant almost a triple-double, 38, 8, and 12. And you still lose the game, especially to a team. I know Cleveland's playing much better this year, but they're a net negative team, and they haven't done anything for the past few years. So I think that just highlights to me the lack of bench production. I think Joe Harris led the bench with 6 points. So they have a lot of things to work out, and they need to get some more production from Jeff Green and some of those other guys.
Yeah, I agree. I think Kyrie actually, after the game, hit the nail on the head. He said, for this team, it's going to come down to how committed are we on the defensive end of the floor. We know that they can score. They have three of the greatest offensive players in the game, maybe of all time, on their team, so scoring is never going to be an issue for them, but they're not going to win a championship unless they play championship level defense. And it's only one game, so I think there's plenty of time for them to work that out. But yeah, you're right. To have a game like that with the stats that those three guys put up, they played a ton of minutes and they still ended up losing. Give credit to the Cavs. Colin Sexton had an amazing game, and he is having an all-star level season in Cleveland. They really are turning a lot of heads, I would say, right now. But that's the way the cookie crumbles for Brooklyn, unfortunately.
Yeah, and that brings us to one of their biggest losses, and Karis LeVert was involved in that trade. He ended up in Indiana after being moved again from Houston for Victor Oladipo. There was a mass discovered on his kidney in an MRI, so he is out indefinitely. Calvin, what do you think about this? Were you surprised that Indiana pushed through with this trade?
I am a little surprised, I guess, but I actually give a lot of credit to the Pacers organization. They've been very supportive of Karis through this whole thing. I actually have a quote here from their president, Kevin Pritchard. He said, "This organization is going to step up, help him get through this, get him back on the court. I'm super confident that we're going to have him on the court in the future." So that's really all you can ask for out of an NBA organization, realizing that this is a much bigger situation than basketball. Karis said it himself. He thinks that this trade could have ultimately saved his life because of these test results. Unfortunately, it's not good news, but we just hope that he gets better as soon as possible.
Yeah, originally when I saw this deal go down, I thought it was a great trade for them. And then, after the MRI came out, I was a little puzzled why they would continue to go through this. And then I kind of thought about it for a little bit, and I felt like this is a great opportunity for an organization to back a player and show a player how much they trust him, how much they're invested in him. And I think that's ultimately going to come back to pay them huge dividends in re-signing him, him being a productive member of the team, and eventually I think he will be the face of that franchise. So I think they did the right thing, and I'm happy for everybody in that situation. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back.
As we mentioned at the top of the show, it was a rough week for the Sacramento Kings, totaling an 0-3 record with 2 losses to the LA Clippers and a loss to the New Orleans Pelicans. Barry, what were your biggest takeaways from this week's games?
Oh man, I don't really want to talk about it much. I'm just going to put it here. 0-3. They gave up 120 points plus a game for 8 games in a row. They broke that streak on Wednesday night against the Clippers. New career high for De'Aaron Fox. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, there's not a lot of good things to say about the Kings week so far, or last week I should say. But tough matchup against the Clippers. The Clippers are the number 1 three-point shooting percentage team in the league, and the Kings are the worst three-point percentage defensive team in the league. So just not a good matchup for them there, but they didn't make things easier on themselves by giving the Clippers consistent wide open looks from 3. They're already the top three-point shooting team in the league. You don't have to give them wide open looks. They were 11 for 19 in the first half or something like that of the first game. That Pelicans game was close, but ultimately too much Zion and a failed Hackett-Adams strategy down the stretch by the Kings is what blew it for them. But you mentioned it, it's defense. In 4 of their last 9 games, they've given up 138, 132, 144, and 137 points. We just saw the Brooklyn Nets score 135 in double overtime and lose that game, and they have probably one of the best offenses in the league. So things really have to tighten up for the Kings on defense.
Lewis kicks it out to Williamson, rising up underneath. That's just not fair.
This brings us to a brand new segment in the show called Fakers and Makers. We look at the standings and we tell you who's faking it and who's gonna make the playoffs. So Calvin, we know the Philadelphia 76ers and the LA Lakers are both at the top of their respective conferences. I think it's safe to say we can pencil both of those teams in for the playoffs. So who you got? Who's faking it and who's making it?
Still very early in the year, so for now I'm just going to go with a couple teams that I think are making it, and number 1 would be the Cleveland Cavaliers. They are probably the most surprising team in the league so far, in my opinion. We already talked about Colin Sexton, who is just balling so far this year, 27 points per game. And they're really interesting when you look at their roster too. I think they've done a very good job of acquiring some more assets, so they could potentially make more moves before the deadline. They have amassed a 7-7 record. They've done that while Kevin Love has only played 2 games this year and Darius Garland has only played in 6 games this year. So they could potentially get even better moving forward. Big question marks to see what they do with Andre Drummond now that they've gotten Jared Allen from the Nets. So they're just a very intriguing team to me going forward. But I think they play great defense, and I think they could sneak into the playoffs this year. They're 4th in the league at 106 points per game given up. My other team is not going to surprise anybody in terms of playoffs, but I think this team could be a contender to come out of the West this year, and that's the Utah Jazz. I think that they learned a lot from being up 3-1 last year to Denver and losing that series. Donovan Mitchell is really coming on strong this year. Rudy Gobert has played Defensive Player of the Year level so far, and they've started to figure out what they needed to do is shoot more threes. They're one of 4 teams in the league right now averaging 40% from 3 as a team shooting. So they are a very dangerous team at 11-4. Barry, who's faking and who's making?
I'm going to start with the Western Conference. One team I think that is faking it, not because of talent-wise, but because of injuries. I'm going to say the Portland Trailblazers. They've been decimated by injuries. CJ McCollum just broke his foot. Nurkic just broke his wrist. And they also have a young, promising power forward in Zach Collins who's recovering from ankle surgery. So I expect that team to drop, and I expect the Nuggets and the Mavericks to move into the playoff picture. I do have a question mark circled around the San Antonio Spurs. They're currently in the playoff picture, but I don't really know what to expect from them, so I'm going to leave them off my list. As far as the Eastern Conference, I'm going to have to disagree with you about the Cleveland Cavaliers. I've enjoyed watching them this season. I'm a big fan of Sex Land, but I think they're ultimately going to miss the playoffs. They're posting a net negative rating of 3.2. I also see the Knicks are in that playoff picture as well, and they are also posting a net negative rating. I think both of these 2 young teams are moving in the right direction, but I think it's too early for both of them. So unless they're making the playoff tournament, I don't see them in the top 8.
What's that? Playoffs? Don't talk about playoffs. You kidding me?
Barry, as you mentioned, the New York Knicks are in the Eastern Conference playoff picture, and they just happen to be the Sacramento Kings' next opponent. The Knicks have surprised a lot of people this year, and they've gotten some excellent play from a few of their key members. Julius Randle and Nikola Jokic are the only 2 players in the league currently averaging at least 22 points, 11 rebounds, and 6 assists a game. RJ Barrett is finally coming into his own in his second year in the league, and the Knicks are having a very positive effect of Tom Thibodeau being their head coach. They are the #1 scoring defense in the league, and they play a grinded-out style of basketball that you're used to seeing from Coach Tibbs. What's standing out to you about the Knicks?
Don't look now, but the Knicks are on the bottom of the league again, but not where you might think, not in the standings. We're talking about pace. Tom Thibodeau has been a huge impact on the Knicks this year, and they've really slowed down the game. As you mentioned, they are allowing the least amount of points per game as defense, and they're playing the best 3-point percentage defense in the league as well. And part of that comes down to playing at a slower pace, grinding it out, and playing with all these bigs that they have. I think it was last offseason or 2 off seasons ago, they signed like 3 power forwards. Mitchell Robinson is finally coming into his own. I know he's averaging 1.8 blocks per game and 1.4 steals per game. Obi Toppin's looked great in the limited time that he's had. And you know, the Knicks are finally coming around.
Yeah, and they really scored with their second-round draft pick too, Emmanuel Quickley. He is averaging 10 points a game right now and shooting very, very well from 3. So a lot of promise for this young team.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting game tonight. You know, the Kings like to run up and down the court, and the Knicks do not. So this game is going to come down to whoever controls the pace. As we mentioned, the Sacramento Kings have lost their last 4 games, but in an even bigger sample size, the Sacramento Kings have lost 8 out of their last 10 games. So obviously there's some adjustments that need to be made. Calvin, what stands out to you most?
Well, the obvious adjustment is they have to play better defense. I think if we're looking at what changes can you make to this team as a whole, you know, we're kind of breaking it down to players, coaching staff, and scheme itself. The scheme has got to change. I don't know what you really do about that though, because defense, when it comes down to it, its 2 most essential components are communication and effort. You can have a fantastic coaching staff. They can only get you to produce as much effort as you're willing to give. And to me, that seems to be the biggest problem. They also have a lot of communication issues, which can be helped by coaching, but it's too early in the season for me to get rid of members of the coaching staff. I'm not a big proponent of firing guys midway through the season in general. So that really only leaves one thing. I think the Kings have to start looking at potential roster moves that they can make to bring in some guys who are more defensive minded, who are going to be guys who are giving more of an effort out there. It almost feels to me like this team, even though they haven't played a ton of games together, that they've kind of plateaued. They're getting better offensively. They're in the top 10 in the league in scoring, but it means nothing if you give up over 120 points a game. So.
Yeah, totally agree there. A few numbers that stand out to me. The Kings have the worst defensive rating in the league at 118.3. They are worst in the league at negative 9.9 point differential. They are worst in the league in points per game at 123. And if you look up the worst defensive ratings for players in the league, the Kings have 9 out of the top 15 worst defensive players in the league. And I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, but number 1, Glenn Robinson, the 3rd. You're number 1 on the list. And another stat that really shot out at me is the Kings are allowing 24.7 points per game in transition, which is 30th in the NBA. And the Kings are also allowing an effective field goal shooting percentage of 75.8 in transition as well. Along with that, the Kings, are 12th in pace, 10th in offensive efficiency, and 13th in assists. So if you have a mediocre or a mid-level offense and the worst defense in the league, I expect to be 5 and 10. So adjustments definitely need to be made. I'm not saying it's time to pull the trigger on firing coaches, anything like that, but schemes need to change. We need more effort. And I think it's time to start thinking about bringing in some defensive-minded players to complement some of the great offensive players we have.
Yeah, and accountability, it comes from the coaching staff, but it also comes from the players themselves. So I wonder, these guys are young. De'Aaron Fox is definitely the best player on this team. He's only 23 years old. He seems to be more vocal out there, I would say, but it's hard to really get a gauge on, is he that, ultimate alpha male, a Draymond Green type guy who's going to night in and night out get the absolute maximum effort out of the guys around him. He gives it himself, but we need that guy to be exuding that same sort of persona throughout the entire team. And that just isn't happening right now.
Defense is contagious.
It is very contagious. But on that note, De'Aaron Fox has been one of the few bright spots this season for the Sacramento Kings.
It off to Hield, back to Fox. Coming downhill, attacks the basket for the layup.
De'Aaron Fox has absolutely played up to his potential over the last 2 weeks. We talked about it a couple weeks ago about how he wasn't quite performing at the level that we expected him to coming into this season, and that has all changed. Unfortunately, the team has not progressed with him, but over his last 5 games, De'Aaron is averaging 26 points per game, and he has improved in the essential shooting categories that we talked about on a couple shows prior. His shooting percentage overall is now up to 48%. His three-point shooting is up to 35.5%. However, free throw line is still where he has a glaring weakness. He's now fallen to 68% at the foul line. That number has got to go up for De'Aaron. But career high 43 points against the Pelicans the other night. De'Aaron has really stepped it up. He looks like he's achieved that all-star level of play, and he's doing it on both ends of the floor. His effort is there defensively. I just wish that it was a little more, like you said, contagious for the other players on the team.
Yeah, Sunday night was exciting. It was fun to watch that game. I wish that we could have come up with a win at the end. But as you mentioned, De'Aaron Fox, 43 points and 13 assists in that game. He becomes the first Kings player to score over 40 and over 10 assists since 1973 when Tiny Archibald did it. So huge milestone for him and for the Kings franchise. And he's been one of the lone bright spots this season. When I'm comparing players, I try and look at a player with a similar attitude, play style, and kind of ceiling that I'm looking for. And if I were to compare De'Aaron Fox to a current NBA player, I think he most resembles John Wall. And if you look at fourth year stats for John Wall and De'Aaron Fox is right on par there with John Wall. The only 2 statistic categories that he is below him is free throw percentage and steals per game. Other than that, everything else, he's doing better than John Wall at this point in his career. And we all saw before the injuries, John Wall was looking like, the best or top 3 point guard in the league and leading his team to the playoffs. So that's all stuff I expect from De'Aaron Fox to come in the future, but that's down the road. He's still young, he's still maturing, and we'll be right back, and we're going to take some trade calls. All right, that brings us to another new and exciting category on this show, the Royal Report. We are going to take trade calls from other GMs and see what we can do with them. So, Calvin, Danny Ainge is calling. Are you picking up the phone?
Yeah, I'm going to pick up the phone. I'm going to be very careful and listen very carefully to what Danny Ainge has to say, because we all know Danny Ainge likes to try to take advantage of every deal that he makes. But Boston's got a bunch of pieces that I think would be excellent fits for Sacramento. Obviously, Marcus Smart is at the top of my wish list. He's at the top of a lot of teams' wish lists, but I think he would be the exact type of player that the Kings are looking for. A very defensive-minded guard who has that sort of alpha male type persona that we talked about earlier that I think could rub off on a lot of other players. I also like Grant Williams a lot. He was compared to Robert Woodard II, the Kings' second-round draft pick this year. He is a beast inside, really good post defender, and can step out and hit the three as well. And then Aaron Nesmith is a guy who I think was a player that the Kings really could have targeted in the draft if Tyrese Halliburton hadn't fallen to them. Very, very good three-point shooter and a really good off-ball defender. So also very young too. So I think those guys would be solid picks for the Kings.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head with Marcus Smart. I think he would be my target if I were the Kings and I was making a deal with the Celtics. They seem to be looking for a big man every year or every other year to fill in that spot. So, you know, we have a few big men, but you hit it right on the head. Marcus Smart, defensive-minded player, alpha male. He could have a huge impact on this team. All right, we got another call coming in. It looks like it's Bob Myers from the Golden State Warriors. Calvin, are you picking up the phone?
I'm only picking up the phone if Draymond Green's available. I don't think that there's anybody else on that roster that I would entertain a phone call for. I don't think that they would improve the Kings' situation overall. We keep harping on it, but the Kings need a strong defensive-minded player who also has a ton of veteran leadership and is going to help bring other players along on the team. And the only guy I see on Golden State's roster that's doing that for Sacramento is Draymond Green.
Yeah, Draymond Green is a huge defensive force and the vocal leader of that team. I would be very interested in bringing Draymond to Sacramento. However, watching their early season struggles and watching the game last night against the New York Knicks where he got ejected in the second quarter, they are lifeless without him, and I don't see them giving up on him anytime soon. I could potentially be interested in Marvin Bagley for James Wiseman swap. I think that would bring more defense to the Kings. And, you know, I might be open to a Harrison Barnes for a Kelly Oubre and maybe that Minnesota pick, as Minnesota seems to just be stuck in the bottom of the standings there. And I think it's top 3 protected and then unprotected the year after that. So that's really what I'd be looking for if I were the Kings. All right, looks like we got another call coming in. It's not from China, but it's from Daryl Morey. He is the current general manager on the Philadelphia 76ers. Calvin, what are you saying when you pick up the phone?
Well, first I'm making sure that China's not listening to my call, but after that, I'm definitely entertaining a trade with the 76ers. Matisse Thybulle would be another perfect fit for Sacramento. Young guy, very, very defensive-minded, can shoot the three. He would be at the top of my wish list from the Philadelphia 76ers. I would even entertain bringing over a guy like Danny Green, somebody who is a very well-known perimeter defender, has had struggles recently shooting the three, but he can be counted on. And most importantly, he's got that championship pedigree and a serious NBA veteran that I think could help bring along a young Kings roster.
Yeah, I agree with both of those. We saw they tried to make the trade for James Harden. It fell through at the last moment. Apparently Ben Simmons and Matisse were both notified that they were being traded or being discussed in trades. So I'd probably target both of those guys. Ben Simmons is a matchup nightmare. I know he's not the greatest shooter in the world, but he's top 10 in defensive efficiency, and he's a huge guy that can play many positions. So if I'm not giving up Fox or Halliburton, I'd make a deal for Ben Simmons. And like you mentioned, Matisse Thybulle, defensive-oriented guy. It's his second year in the league. He's on affordable contract. And, you know, his minutes are down this year. He's only playing 14 minutes a game, which is down from 18 last year. So they don't seem to be using him too much, and they have the best record in the East. So maybe they're looking to build and bring in players that are ready to win now and not guys that they have to develop and slowly bring along. Are there any other guys that you would target if you're the general manager of the Kings?
Yeah, well, first let me say, if the Kings are going to make a deal for Ben Simmons and not give up De'Aaron Fox or Tyrese Halliburton, Monty McNair should win GM of the decade, probably, but that's probably another story. I do really like Mikal Bridges from the Phoenix Suns. I think they like him a lot too, and it would be really hard to get him away from the team, but I think he is another one of those perfect wing defenders, a guy that can take over for Harrison Barnes in the future. Excellent outside shooter. Really long defender, can guard inside and out. He's a great two-way player, so he would be very high on my list as well.
Okay. A few names that I want to mention. Chris Boucher from Toronto. He's averaging 2.4 blocks a game. He's number 3 in offensive rating in the league, and he's on a very affordable contract at $6 million a year. Indiana, Miles Turner. He's leading the league, 4.2 blocks a game. He just signed a 3-year, $18 million per year contract, very affordable, and he's 6th in the league in defensive rating. I know we talked about him in the offseason, but he'd be a guy that I'd love to bring in and help anchor the defense in the center for the Kings. I'd love to call up Cleveland about Andre Drummond. He's 2nd in the league in defensive rating. He's also an expiring free agent at the end of the year, so we might not have to give up a lot for him. And if it didn't fit, he would walk in the offseason and we'd open up that cap space that the Kings have valued this year. 2 more guys I would mention. Lou Dort, really impressed with him last year on the Thunder. He's having a career year this year, 43% from 3-point range, and he's only 21 years old. So love what I've seen from him on the defensive end. I know he had some struggles in the playoffs offensively, but it seems like his offensive game is kind of slowly coming around. So another 3-and-D guy I'd love to have on the Sacramento Kings. And the last guy I'd like to mention is Robert Covington. He's been traded, I think, 3 times in the past 4 years. Great 3-and-D player. He's with the Portland Trailblazers now. They're experiencing all sorts of injury problems, and he's had a very down year. He's only averaging 6.6 points per game. He's shooting 31% from the field and 30% from 3-point range. So I think we could potentially convince the Portland Trailblazers to move on from him. So he'd be another guy I'd love to target for the Sacramento Kings.
All good names. I like that list a lot. All right, well, when we come back, you know what time it is. More questions from the kingdom.
Fellas, it was sounding great, but I could have used a little more cowbell.
What team's 3-point defense should the Kings try to copy?
Well, I think the correct answer is any team not named the Sacramento Kings. As we had mentioned earlier, the Kings are at the bottom of almost every defensive category, and that's simply not going to cut it for them. If you look at some of the teams on the top end of the spectrum, you have Phoenix, you have Cleveland, you have New York, all great defensive teams. But the problem with that is those teams, they love to slow down the pace. So they're in the bottom of the league in pace as well, and that's something that's not going to work for the Sacramento Kings. So if I'm looking for a team to emulate or have a similar defensive strategy, I'm looking at Philadelphia, 4th in the league in pace and 4th in the league in defensive efficiency. Milwaukee, 6th in the league in pace, 8th in the league in defensive efficiency. And also Atlanta, they're 10th in the league in pace and 10th in the league in defense. So 3 teams that I think are having stellar years, that are playing great offense and defense at the same time. And I think that's the key, is finding that balance. Sometimes I feel like the Kings are kind of playing from behind and they just play offense and then try and figure it out on defense. When, I think if the Kings played a little bit better defense, that would open up some of those transition baskets in that offense and allow them to run a little bit faster. What do you think, Cal?
I'm going to go with the Miami Heat, and this is why. Miami is composed of a handful of players that are very good individual defenders, on-ball defenders. They've got Jimmy Butler, they have a rim protector in Bam Adebayo, and then the rest of their team is composed of shooters who are average to below average defenders, particularly Duncan Robinson, who I think is the equivalent to Buddy Hield on the Sacramento Kings. The Kings have De'Aaron Fox, who's a good on-ball defender. They have a rim protector in Richaun Holmes. What the Heat do to make up for their defensive inefficiencies is they rotate amazingly well and they communicate amazingly well on defense. So for me, that's the team that I think the Kings should try to be more like. I think they have very similar components. And like you mentioned, Miami is in the middle of both of those categories as well. They're not top 5 necessarily in either offense or defensive efficiency, even though they have top 5 defensive efficiency capability. So Miami's the team for me. What's the next question?
Will Luke Walton be back as head coach next season?
Ultimately, if the Kings don't end up making the playoffs this season, I feel that Luke Walton will be out as head coach. New GMs with new organizations like to handpick their own guys to run those teams. Luke Walton was not picked by Monty McNair. He's given him an opportunity this year, and whether it's Luke Walton's fault or not, the Kings are not performing. So I feel that if the Kings end up missing the playoffs for a 15th straight year, the door is open for McNair to make a change.
I'm going to leave this one up to you guys. I'm going to give you a few different stats, and then I want you to let us know in the comments down below whether you think Luke Walton will return next year as head coach. As we all know, Luke Walton took over temporarily for the Golden State Warriors when Steve Kerr was having some issues with his back. He coached for 43 games, amassed a record of 39-4. And this was before Kevin Durant. This was with Harrison Barnes playing the 3. After that, he took over for the LA Lakers. His first year with the Lakers, their defensive was ranked 30th in the league. In his next 2 years, they were ranked 12th in the league. So there was some improvement there. Over his 3-year coaching career with the Lakers, he was only able to amass a career record of about 40% win percentage. And I'm going to give you 3 players that ended up leaving the Lakers and increasing their points per game by over 5 points, and 2 of those players won All-Star awards. So the first one is D'Angelo Russell, the second one is Brandon Ingram, and the third one, who is experiencing a crazy career year this year on a second team after Lakers, Julius Randle. So you guys let me know down below if you think Luke Walton will return next year or not. Next question.
Is it time for the Kings to start thinking about tanking?
No tanking. This is not the military. Tanking is not the answer. I'm gonna give a quick shout out to my boy Leo, Cowbell Kingdom. Totally agree with you, Leo. We should not tank. We need to develop culture, we need to clear cap space, and we need to acquire more young players. Take a look at this last draft. We had the 12th pick in the draft. We ended up with one of the best players in this year's class. So I think that no tanking. We need to try and win. If you want good draft picks, trade for other teams' draft picks.
Yeah, I agree with you. Tanking is never the answer. But if the Kings continue to play defense like a doormat, they're not going to have to worry about that. They'll essentially be tanking anyway. However, it's just not the right situation for any franchise. It's not how you build a winning culture. It's not how you get player development done if all you're doing is trying to lose games. And in the NBA, there's a draft lottery. There's no guarantee that you're going to get the number 1 pick anyway. So I don't see any situation where losing games on purpose helps.
Totally agree. Tonight we're playing the New York Knicks. We got to run. They have the slowest pace in the NBA, so I think if we keep running, we can probably tire them out. Pretty slow week. We got 2 postponed games against the Grizzlies, and then on Wednesday we're playing the Orlando Magic. Calvin, what's our record going to be this week?
Oh, it's got to be 2-0, right? The Kings are due for a win, big time. 2 wins.
Definitely 2-0. In other news, Vlade Divac is putting his home up for sale in downtown Sacramento, $1.6 million. Hopefully one of you guys can start us a GoFundMe so we can relocate the headquarters over there. Anyways, just want to thank you all for joining us. If you found this video informative, go ahead and like it and leave a comment on below. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Hope you guys have a wonderful week. We'll see you all soon, and go Kings!
Go Kings!